Hello everyone. Looking at the weather map today, we're seeing a really dynamic situation unfolding across North America. There's quite a bit happening right now, and what makes this particularly interesting is how different air masses are interacting in ways that are creating some pretty distinct regional experiences. This isn't your typical quiet weather day, where conditions are fairly uniform across large areas. The big story today is this clash between contrasting air masses. We've got colder air that's positioned across much of Canada and the northern United States, and it's meeting up with warmer, more humid air that's established across the southern regions. When you see these kinds of setups on the map, it usually means the atmosphere is in a more active state than usual. These air mass boundaries are where a lot of the interesting weather development tends to happen. Let me walk you through what we're seeing in different areas, because the regional differences are really striking today. Starting with Canada, much of the country is dealing with that cold air mass I mentioned. This isn't just mildly cool weather we're talking about. The temperatures across Canadian regions are running low enough that they're genuinely affecting daily activities and how people need to prepare when they head outside. The Canadian cold air mass has some impressive characteristics when you look at it on the continental scale. It's not just a shallow feature that affects surface temperatures. This is a deep, well-established air mass that has real staying power. The kind of air mass that, once it gets established, tends to maintain its influence for extended periods rather than just passing through quickly. What's particularly noteworthy about this Canadian cold air is that it's not just sitting stationary. This air mass is occasionally pushing southward, and when it does, the northern states of the US are feeling those effects pretty directly. We're seeing temperatures drop to levels that really do impact how people go about their day. For anyone in these northern regions, bundling up when you head outside isn't just a suggestion, it's pretty much a necessity right now. The movement of this cold air southward is creating some interesting dynamics along the border regions. Rather than having a sharp, defined line between the cold and warmer air, we're seeing these transition zones where the characteristics can change relatively quickly. These are the areas where conditions can become quite variable over short periods of time. It's in these transition zones where you might experience conditions that feel significantly different from what you had just a few hours earlier. The border regions between the US and Canada are particularly fascinating to watch in setups like this. The geographical features, the different elevations, and even the urban areas all play roles in how these air masses interact and move. Cities can create their own microclimates that modify how these larger-scale patterns affect local conditions. Now, when we shift our focus to the southern parts of the United States, we're looking at a completely different picture. The weather here is maintaining those warmer characteristics, which creates this really significant contrast with what's happening further north. But here's where things get interesting from a meteorological standpoint. The southern air mass has its own set of characteristics that make it important to this overall pattern. The warmth isn't just surface-level heating. This represents air that has different moisture content, different density, and different energy levels compared to the northern air mass. These differences are what drive the atmospheric instability when the air masses interact. Where this warm southern air is meeting the cold air coming down from the north, the atmosphere is becoming much more unstable. This instability is what drives a lot of the weather changes we're seeing. The collision between these different air masses creates conditions where what looks calm and settled in one area can quickly transition into something much more active. This meeting zone between the air masses is particularly fascinating to watch on the map. The boundary isn't static, it's moving and shifting, which means the area of instability is also moving around. This can lead to situations where conditions in one location can change pretty dramatically over the course of just a few hours. The mobility of this boundary is what makes forecasting in these areas more challenging, but also more important. Central America is showing some really dynamic characteristics today as well. The weather patterns here are exhibiting quite a bit of energy, with winds picking up speed in various areas. This increased wind flow is causing weather systems to move more rapidly from west to east than we typically see. When weather systems move this quickly, they tend to displace both the warm and cold air masses we've been talking about. The rapid movement we're seeing across Central America has implications that extend well beyond just that immediate region. These fast-moving systems often serve as triggers for weather development downstream. They can accelerate the interaction between air masses and help organize weather patterns across much larger geographic areas. This rapid movement of systems is creating some short-lived but impactful weather events across certain regions. The speed at which these systems are moving means that conditions can change relatively quickly, and the effects, while brief, can be quite noticeable when they do occur. These quick-hitting events can catch people off guard if they're not staying informed about current conditions. As we track this movement eastward, the dynamic nature of the pattern becomes even more apparent. The eastern regions are experiencing weather that can show several different characteristics within a single day. What starts as a calm morning can evolve into something much more active as the day progresses, with rain or stronger winds developing as these moving systems pass through. The eastern regions are really where all of these different influences come together. The cold air from the north, the warm air from the south, and the dynamic systems from the west all converge in these areas. This convergence is what creates the potential for such variable conditions throughout the day. This variability is something that people in these eastern regions really need to keep in mind. The morning weather conditions might not be a reliable indicator of what the afternoon or evening will bring. It's the kind of setup where checking updated forecasts throughout the day can be really valuable for planning purposes. Having a weather app that provides regular updates can be particularly helpful during these dynamic periods. The southeastern regions are showing their own unique signature in all of this. Humidity levels are running higher across these areas, and that increased moisture content in the air is creating conditions that can support more intense rainfall when systems do move through. The air feels heavier, cloud cover becomes more substantial, and when precipitation does develop, it can be more significant than what you might see in drier regions. This higher humidity also creates the potential for more dramatic weather events. We're looking at conditions that could support thunderstorm development when the right trigger comes along. These events might be relatively short-lived, but they can certainly make their presence known when they do occur. The combination of instability and moisture creates an environment where convective activity can develop relatively quickly. The increased moisture content also affects how the air masses interact with each other. When humid air meets drier air, or when warm humid air encounters colder air masses, the contrasts become more pronounced, and this can lead to more vigorous weather development. The southeastern regions often serve as the breeding ground for these more intense interactions. Even though the western regions appear more stable when you look at the current map, they're actually playing an important role in this overall pattern. The weather systems and air movements that start in the west often serve as the initial drivers for changes that show up in the central and eastern parts of the country a few days later. The western regions have their own complex topography that affects how weather patterns develop and move. The mountain ranges, the valleys, and the coastal influences all contribute to how systems organize before they begin their journey eastward. Understanding these western influences is key to anticipating what might develop downstream. This means that while the western areas might look calm right now, the atmospheric setups that are developing there could be setting the stage for changes elsewhere. It's a good reminder that weather patterns are interconnected across large geographic areas, and what happens in one region often influences what occurs in others. The western regions are essentially acting as the staging area for the air movements that are creating all this dynamic activity further east. The systems that originate here gather energy and organization as they move across the country, often becoming more impactful by the time they reach the central and eastern regions. Looking at the overall continental picture, what really stands out is how the weather isn't following any single predictable pattern right now. We're seeing significant regional differences that make this a particularly complex setup to analyze. In some areas, winter-like conditions are dominating the scene, while other regions are dealing with much warmer and more humid weather. This regional diversity is what makes the current pattern so interesting, but also so challenging for people trying to plan their activities. The conditions you're experiencing in your immediate area might be completely different from what's happening just a few states away. This kind of continental scale variation requires people to pay attention to local conditions rather than assuming that broader regional trends apply to their specific location. The atmosphere is displaying a lot of energy right now. Air masses are in constant motion, temperatures are fluctuating as these different air masses move around, and the winds are helping to accelerate all of these changes. This high level of atmospheric activity means that weather conditions can evolve relatively quickly. This variability is something that's worth factoring into daily planning. The weather you see when you wake up in the morning might not be representative of what you'll encounter later in the day. Having backup plans or being prepared for changing conditions can be really helpful when the atmosphere is in this kind of active state. The interaction between all these moving parts creates a situation where forecasting becomes more challenging but also more important. When the atmosphere is this dynamic, staying informed about current conditions and short-term changes becomes particularly valuable. What we're seeing today is essentially a reminder of how complex and interconnected weather systems can be. The cold air in Canada, the warm air in the south, the dynamic systems in between, and the western regions that are feeding energy into the whole system all work together to create the overall pattern we're observing. This type of setup can persist for several days, which means the general characteristics we're seeing now, the regional differences, the instability zones, and the rapid changes are likely to continue influencing weather across the continent for the immediate future.